This video is about sales forecasting and builds on the work we did in the first video on revenue. So let's consider our business again. If we're going to run our business successfully, we need to try and anticipate or predict what's going to happen in the future. And that's what sales forecasting is all about. So in this video, we're going to try and answer the following three questions. Why do businesses forecast sales? And what is a sales forecast? What might affect how well a business forecasts its sales? And are there any difficulties involved in a business putting together this forecast? Okay, let's start with our definition. What exactly is a sales forecast? Well, a sales forecast is a prediction or an estimate of future sales volumes and trends. This is an important definition and you should write it down in your notes. What do we mean by sales volume? Well, by sales volume, we mean the number of units that the business is going to sell in the future, or the amount of revenue the business will earn from selling its products. And what do we mean by trends? Well, trends is kind of how these numbers will move up and down over time. Are they going to be rising? Are they going to peak and then come down? Or do we think they're maybe on a bit of a slow decline? Let's consider an example below. This shows the market for ebooks, online book sales. And if we have a look at the blue line, what's actually happened, we can see that over time sales have been going up, but they have been moving kind of up and down. And we reached the point in mid-2012 where sales have stopped. Now at this point, the business would probably want to know, what does the future hold? What would be my expectation for future sales and how will that affect the business? And so what the business might do is a sales forecast. And the orange line here shows us what that sales forecast might look like. And in this case, the forecast is pretty much going in an upward direction following the trend of the previous sales. Now, why would a business do this? Why would a business forecast sales? You might want to pause the video at this stage and take a moment just to think of the advantages of doing a sales forecast for a business. Well, why would a business forecast sales? Because they're very helpful, and these information can be helpful to the business in a number of different areas. If we start in the top left-hand corner, from a finance perspective, a sales forecast can be really useful because it lets the business know how well it's going to do financially. They can predict how much cash they're going to receive from selling their products. They can assess whether they're likely to break even and whether they're keeping on track with their plans. Another area of the business might be marketing, and they could also find this sales forecast very useful. If they know that there's going to be an increase in sales in the future, or that's what's planned, they might start to increase perhaps their level of advertising. The people within the business who organise the staff may also find this very useful. Why is that? Well, because they can put in place a plan to meet those higher sales. If you're forecasting you're going to sell have higher levels of sales in the future, then you might need to require more staff. If your forecast shows that you have a seasonal sales in future, maybe high sales at Christmas, but not so many in the summer, again, the staff can be hired to suit those trends. And the last area of the business that could find it useful is resource management, the operations department. If they expect sales are going to rise in future, that's what the forecast suggests, then they can ensure they have the stock, the machinery in place, the suppliers are ready so they can produce those high levels of sales, high levels of goods to be sold. Okay, so we've looked at our business and we've looked at our prediction of what's going to happen in the future. What might influence those forecasts? Well, the first thing that might influence the forecast, or the business would have to take into account, is consumer trends. What are the changes going on with their customers? For example, some goods come in and out of fashion. You think of a clothing manufacturer, then what's in fashion on the catwalk might influence how many of those items they sell in, say, the next 6 months. Shopping habits as well will have an impact. People buying more online, that might affect ebooks versus the more traditional books you might find in a high street shop. And also demographics. As people age, maybe they change their tastes, and you need to reflect that with your expectation of how many units you're going to sell. Another factor that might influence your forecast is what's going on in the actual economy. For example, if interest rates are low, people might have more spare money to spend. They're not paying back any debts, so they might buy more of your products, and you would forecast an increase in the number of units you're going to sell. If more people have more jobs, if people are feeling more confident, if the economy is going well and people are spending, then you might factor in an uprise or an increase in your sales forecast. But also the opposite is true. If people are losing jobs, there's a recession going on, it's all doom and gloom, then you would expect probably your sales forecast to reflect that and maybe being stable or going down. The last thing that might influence your sales forecast is the action of competitors. If there are new competitors opening up nearby you, then that might put a bit of a downer on your forecast and you might predict a bit lower. If you know that one of your competitors is going bust, then you might think, well, this is quite good, and we maybe should forecast we're going to sell a bit more. Maybe take into account what price they're charging, what sort of promotion advertising they're doing. That might affect your forecast, your expectation of what's going to happen in the future. And then lastly, how do they compare to you? If they're very efficient and they're quite able to respond, if they've got a strong brand, then you might say, maybe we'll forecast a little bit more conservatively than we would if they were perhaps a weaker competitor. Okay, so let's go and have a little think about what might affect the sales forecast for an actual business. Let's imagine perhaps a high street food business, maybe somewhere where you live, maybe Wagamama in Kingston. So what you might want to do now is pause the video and think about what might affect how Wagamama in Kingston would forecast their sales. Well, let's think about this. Wagamama in Kingston, there are a number of things that might affect the level of sales. For example, if we start with fashion or consumer trends, then perhaps the taste that consumers have, maybe for Japanese style food, if that's on the rise, you would probably forecast an increase. However, if people are potentially buying more pizza or Italian food, then your sales forecast would probably reflect that and be slightly lower. What about the economy? Well, if jobs are plentiful in Kingston and everyone's feeling their job is quite secure, then they're probably more likely to spend more money in a high street restaurant, and so you would predict an increase in sales. However, if the economy wasn't doing so well, maybe they'd stay at home and get a takeaway, and so your sales forecast might be slightly lower. What about competition? Well, if Azizi's opened across the road, you might say it's going to have a negative effect because more customers might go there, and so we're going to put a bit of a down on our forecasts. Likewise, if somewhere up the road, Latasca shuts down, then maybe we'll get an increase in sales, and so we should reflect that. So for each business, there's going to be a number of things affecting their sales forecast in the local area. Okay, we've covered 1 and we've covered 2. What might be the difficulties of setting a sales forecast? What might be the difficulties in making these predictions? Well, as we know, the future is not certain, so predicting the future is very difficult. And so as a result, it's unlikely your forecast is going to be exactly right. Things change outside of the business's control. If things happen in the economy, people start to lose their jobs, then that's nothing that they can control and may not be something they could foresee. Unpredictable events. Maybe your supply goes bust and you couldn't actually produce the number of units, therefore you couldn't sell them, and so your forecast doesn't turn out to be true in the end. And also the time frame. It's probably easy to predict what you're going to be doing tomorrow, but more difficult to predict what you're going to be doing in 5 years' time. So as the time gets further from now, it's more and more difficult to get an accurate forecast. Lastly, if you're using the past as an indication of what's happening in the future, then this is not always the best indication. Most successful businesses' sales rise for a period of time, but it's not always sustained throughout the future. Replacement products come up, other businesses emerge, and so just rolling forward what happened in the past might not always give you an accurate result. The last thing to mention is it depends on what information you base your forecast on. If there's a lack of good information that you're using, maybe very old, or you've heard it down the pub, then it's unlikely your forecast is going to be very accurate. Okay, that's all on this video.